boys with musical ambitions made their way from New England to New York.
I got my house surrounded. I know I'm in there.
I'm Marcy Silman. John Flansburgh and John Linnell became the seminal pop group They Might Be Giants, darlings of the downtown New York art scene, National Public Radio, and all points in between. They Might Be Giants are the subject of a new documentary movie called Gigantic, A Tale of Two Johns. We'll meet one filmmaker and one giant just ahead. Later this hour, live performance by guitarist Michael Nicolella. His repertoire ranges from J.S. Bach to Jimi Hendrix. We'll hear Michael Nicolella play, plus look ahead to the weekend at the Seattle International Film Festival. Stay with the beat after the news from National Public Radio.
25 hours a day, 6 days a week. That music at the end of the tunnel for the next generation. Thank you for calling. Tell your friends.
Seattle. I'm Marcy Silman. Many young boys and girls dream of being music stars. John Flansburgh and John Linnell were among them. The two high school friends from Massachusetts are the founders and the heart of the band They Might Be Giants. It was an indie band before anybody ever really used that term. They Might Be Giants' recording career started when they began hawking demo cassettes on the streets of New York, or so the story goes. Last year, the band recorded its first studio album in 5 years, and during that process, they were themselves recorded for a documentary film. Gigantic, A Tale of Two Johns, was a labor of love for filmmaker A.J. Schnack. Gigantic traces the rise and long, long, long career of They Might Be Giants and brings fans a whole lot of music in the process. Joining us in the studio today are filmmaker A.J. Schnack and one giant, John Flansburgh. Thanks, both of you, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, A.J., were you a big fan of the band? Is that why you made this film?
Yeah, I was one of the people who sort of got exposed to them early on, like in their sort of national career in the late 80s, and found them...
The national career as opposed to what?
Right. They're well, I mean, they had a very strong New York following, and then suddenly, I think with the playing of their videos on MTV, which was a pretty seminal moment for the alternative rock movement and the rock video movement, that people sort of across the country who would go home over Christmas break in like 1988 turned on their TV, and as John Linnell says in the film, you know, between Whitney Houston and Whitesnake, suddenly there were these two guys on Super 8 film doing strange dances with pretty insane props on the East River waterfront.
And so you saw that.
Saw that, and you know, that was sort of at the time when I was really getting into underground music and the sort of alternative stuff that was happening at that time. And I was really into them right away, and I had, you know, went out and got their record, and was a pretty big fan back in Missouri of them and of the first two records in particular. They were pretty, you know, big college records for me.
So one day you said, gee, it would be great to make a documentary film about these guys?
Yeah, you know, it was a funny thing. It was a year ago, a little over a year ago, I saw them play, and I actually had gotten to know Mr. Flansburgh in the early 90s, and wasn't really something that I had been thinking about. And I went to see a show of theirs, and the audience was all, you know, very young, you know, 19, 20, 21, and they knew all the words, and it was a sold-out house in Los Angeles. And it struck me that that was an unusual thing, that a band that had been around almost 20 years wasn't doing an oldie show, was really doing some pretty vital stuff, and had a young audience, and a great mixed audience. A lot of people, women backstage afterwards, and Harry Shearer was there. And I think that those two ideas, the fact that there were a lot of young people who were into them, as well as someone like Harry Shearer, who, to my mind, is, you know, one of the great satirists, you know, around. And I knew that there were a lot of other really strong literary types and sort of alternative comedian types who were big fans of the band. And just all those ideas kind of came steamrolling into my head, and I thought, wow, you know, they actually have a pretty interesting story.
Well, so John Flansburgh, you guys have been all over various types of media. What happens when someone says, I want to make a film about you?
Well, AJ had unusual access to us because AJ was my video rep. I've actually directed rock videos for other bands over the last half dozen years, and he was my producer. So we had a professional relationship. But I have to say, it really bowled me over when he sprung this idea on me, just because I guess as a band, I really I think of They Might Be Giants as a very abstract project. I don't think of what's interesting about what we do as being, John and John or our band, or kind of, there's not a lot of controversy about our band. We're not glamorous people. We're very earthbound, and we don't particularly care about like rock star trappings. And I mean, in fact, we kind of hate all that stuff. And the dramas that we do have are kind of private. It's like we're very pretentious about what we do, and we kind of hide our effort from the public, and we try to keep the mystery in we don't put our pictures on our records, and we go to great lengths to kind of keep a certain amount of mystery in what we do, because we think that that's the stuff of it. That's what makes what we do I mean, our songs are what we want people to pay attention to.
Well, we meet you in the film, you and John Linnell, sitting in armchairs. I'm not sure in front of what body of water.
The East River.
The East River. So that's near your house.
In the exact spot where the Put Your Hand Inside the Puppet Head, their first video was shot. So.
Yes, shot on the tails of Married to the Mob, the Jonathan Demme movie that Adam Bernstein, our video director, had worked as an assistant on. And so they gave him all the little end clippings when they run out of. I don't people who know about filmmaking know that like there's this thing where they sort of cut off the ends and then they just splice all. You can splice all the ends together, and it's just the throwaway. This is the throwaway film, but it still works. And so when we were filming our first video, we actually had no idea like when the giant splice would enter through the scene. It was just kind of the risk we took with every shot.
Well, did it feel weird to be sitting in those armchairs and having somebody interview you?
It felt weirder about 6 hours later when the sunburn came in, because we actually had like the reflectors on us for many hours straight, and so it was kind of like being in a sun lamp for a really long time. But it was a beautiful day, and it was actually pretty pleasant. I mean, I live 2 blocks away from where it was filmed, so it was like I basically walked out of my house and talked to AJ for a while.
You guys knew each other from junior high, is that right?
John Linnell and I went to the same public school in Lincoln, Massachusetts, for our childhoods, and then became friends. He's a year older than me, so we actually really became friends in high school, but we knew each other in junior high school.
Well, so at that time, were you like all those boys who thought, I just want to have a rock band?
I actually had a very specific relationship with. I was a huge fan, and I think in some ways, it would probably have been more likely that I would end up being like some freeform radio DJ or something, than actually be in a rock band if it hadn't been for the whole punk rock thing. I mean, that was kind of amnesty day for all the wannabes, because up until I was born in 1960, which is really like the perfect time to be overwhelmed by pop music, because when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, you look at the charts at that time, think about what AM radio was. It's unbelievable, the quality of pop songs. I mean, it would just make anyone fall in love with the pop song. And but there's also something kind of superhuman about it. I mean, you might love the Beatles, and you might really want to follow the Beatles, but you don't really think like, I'm gonna be the Beatles. They're very larger than life, and it really was. It was the punk rock thing that basically made it seem like I couldn't really play. I mean, when we started the band, I couldn't play and sing at the same time. So
because it was too hard to concentrate.
It's hard to play and sing at the same time. Oh yeah. It's actually one of the strange. It's like patting your stomach and rubbing your head at the same time.
You told.
I mean, for me, I don't know. I'm sure it's easy for some people.
Not for me. I can't play at all.
I think it was easy for Jimi Hendrix. But some people are.
I think he played before he sang.
Yeah, but he seemed pretty comfortable doing both at the same time.
You told an interviewer that there were garage bands and you guys were a living room band.
We're kind of we're. I think the thing, in some ways, I think we did a lot of home taping, which we had. I actually bought a tape recorder before I ever even had an electric guitar. I had a TX 4-track, and I did these kind of vague Brian Eno-esque type soundscapes with like feedback, and I had a toy organ that I would record, and it was just very experimental, kind of wide open stuff. And then with New Wave, it kind of reintroduced me to the idea of like what a song could be. And that's when I really started kind of getting back into the formal craft of the song idea.
How many songs have you guys written?
We've recorded. We actually counted recently we were making a T-shirt, so we decided to because there's always a new need for T-shirt designs, and we we figured out that we've recorded over 300 songs as They Might Be Giants.
Recorded, though. How many
Recorded, and I mean those are like released, published. Like there's it's listed with BMI. We've probably written half again as many. I mean, the sad thing is, most of them are really just okay songs. I think it's not really it's a sort of a dubious thing to brag about. I mean, I don't want to sound like somebody goes like produced by, written by, I don't know. We just want to write good songs.
Well, I think we have some queued up, so we're going to listen to a song. I'm not sure what song it is, so you'll tell us. We have a song from They Might Be Giants, written by, recorded by. Yeah,
produced by, in cooperation with They Might Be Giants Productions, in association with They Might Be Giants International.
Here it is on the beat. An upcoming album, and this is a record, John Flansburgh, for kids.
Yeah, we've actually recorded a special record for. Well, it's actually really as much a present for the adults who have to listen to children's music as it is for children themselves, because it's like very much like a regular They Might Be Giants record in a lot of ways, except we've taken out the random death imagery, and it's not particularly educational, and I don't think it'll make your kid any better as like a student, or there's no extracurricular.
But we're going to enjoy it as parents.
But you'll enjoy it, and I think the kids will enjoy it, and it's really good. There's a lot of things, a lot of sort of vocabulary building things in it, and a lot of different ideas.
Oh, good. We'll have to preview it for the vocabulary. Well, one thing that I found really interesting in the movie, AJ, and I don't remember who said this. Maybe you did, John Flansburgh. People always say, "Oh, They Might Be Giants. They're so funny, and all the lyrics are so funny," and in fact. When people start deconstructing some of the lyrics in the film, they're not always all that funny. They were saying, "Oh, They Might Be Giants. They're like other bands, but they're not angst-ridden." But some of the songs kind of were.
Well, I don't mean to jump in, but I mean as a songwriter, who's been involved with it, like I think that we're as a band we're very specifically we're not. As much as rock critics would love to think that we're a very adolescent kind of over-the-top band, we're actually an extremely deadpan and extraordinarily adult band. And adults don't care about, fashion as much as teenagers. Adults don't care about, you learn to live with your problems in a way that's very different than, not everything is going to kill you, in the way that, like, a 19-year-old might think that everything is going to kill them. And so we kind of explore a lot of the kind of gray middle range stuff of life in our songs. And so it's a balancing act. I think that, there's some, some very happy melodies with some very, sort of dire, strange over-the-top lyrics. But the overall effect, I think, is the thing that we're interested in.
Well, I hadn't realized that you two had a professional relationship. So, AJ, did you know everything going into making the film about John and John?
No, there were a lot of things I didn't know, and it was sort of, I had vague ideas of like, well, this could be interesting, and then I did a bunch of research and read like a lot of articles and learned, a lot of different things, and the sort of the dark lyric element was something that was really. I mean, I always knew as "Don't Let's Start" was one of my favorite songs. In college, you can't really get by the lyric, no one in the world ever gets what they want, and that is beautiful, which is such a brilliant line, and we play off that in the film. But I hadn't really, I didn't go through the lyric sheets of all the records and read them until I started preparing for the project, and suddenly I was like. Every song is like that. It's not just that one. And so
we're very lonely and sad men.
Yeah, there's a lot of I'm dying and you're stepping on my grave kind of imagery in the songs. That was one element. The other element that was really surprised me, and John had mentioned it to me at times, and I guess it hadn't really sunk in, was that their roots in New York as a band were inside the performance art scene, and that to me, I think it sort of really explains the band in a way to people who may have been like, well, what are they about? I think people who want to just go, oh, well, they're wacky or they're weird or they're eclectic or strange or whatever. I think the idea that's kind of the world in which they originated. It's sort of like a light bulb going on in a way, and it makes tons of sense.
Did you go to New York?
Yeah, I moved.
Thinking that you were going to be a big musician?
No, I've never thought I was. I still wonder if I ever will be a big musician to this day. But no, I went to New York to go to art school. I actually I was on a world tour of higher institutions of learning, and I finally landed at Pratt, where I sort of discovered the discipline of fine arts, and in a lot of ways I applied a lot of what I learned in art school very directly to They Might Be Giants as a project. In part, just writing actively, doing the work every day, and not thinking about necessarily just waiting for inspiration, but actually just working on the craft of it.
So, Dial a Song. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie when we come into, I guess, what was your former apartment?
No, it's my studio now, yeah. It was my apartment for the first, 10 years of my New York residency, and then... It's
small. It's a small apartment.
It's very dirty and cluttered, and strangers are not allowed in there. It's basically like I and John Linnell alone.
And all the film viewers.
Yeah. It might be shocking to my parents.
Well, I want to go back. The idea it looked like an office.
I'm feeling deep shame about that scene in the movie.
The Dial a Song, did you think of that as music, or did you think of that as a performance? Well,
it was a very specific. I mean, one of the nicest things about like my 20s and moving to New York is that it really was a time, in the way that when you hear your grandparent, your 80-year-old great aunt going like, oh yes, the 20s, they were such a time, people knew how to celebrate. I mean, it was coming out of the East Village performance art scene was really, really fantastic. I mean, at the time, New York is always a cynical place, and everybody's always in like a grumpy, cynical mood. But it was Keith Haring was in of the moment, and all this very sort of kind of oddball, cartoony stuff being generated by extremely and finding like tremendous success and being very really celebrated, and the whole fusion of kind of black street culture with white rock culture just seemed like a very wonderful, positive. It was a very positive time, and it was pre-AIDS, I mean, it was just a different world, it was very easy to be very, very carefree, and looking back on it now, I mean, it just makes me feel so happy that I could be part of such an interesting moment. And in our own weird way, the whole phone machine thing was a New York phenomenon. I mean, like, I think people can remember like Oh Superman by Laurie Anderson, which is like a phone machine recording kind of answer, and it was a fad there before it ever got out anywhere else. I mean, the way like cell phones kind of started in L.A., phone machines seemed to have sort of started in New York City in like 80 or 79. And the first time I ever heard about it, I just thought, wow, that would be such a great way to like have people hear your music, because you wouldn't need a radio, you wouldn't have to rely on having a record out. You could just kind of, get the word out, kind of like, the movie theater announces their stuff, or there was Dial a Prayer. This was like before any of the phone things.
Certainly before the internet, where you just turn on your computer and download somebody's record.
Yeah, so it was like this tremendously democratic thing. I just thought, like, hey, we're doing this thing that not necessarily everybody's going to like, but we can find our own audience through this sort of unorthodox technology. And obviously, like, if you're a curiosity seeker and you see a thing that says, like, call this number and hear a song, then, what kind of person is going to actually do that? The kind of person who's curious about new stuff. They're open to different experiences. And we found our audience that way. I mean, that was exactly where our crowd came from.
There's something about that also, that in the film, to me, even though the film is about They Might Be Giants, I have a real love for artists who work in a very DIY sort of format, and both on the indie film level and also in a music level, just the idea of an artist saying, like, okay, well, these, typical means of getting my message out, my song out, my film out, aren't going to be available to me. So how do I find another way to do that? And so, the Giants have, in my mind, done that more times and in more interesting ways than anyone else I can think of. So even though the film is really about them, I think it also really speaks about artists who have a love for doing that, have a want for doing that, and do that successfully.
We're going to hear a little bit more music. This is actually from the film, so I'm not sure if it's the soundtrack album or just that we get to hear it here. So.
Oh, it's an exclusive. That's
an exclusive.
Right. Yes.
Cool. Here's some music. Now, that is actually an exclusive. It's a song recorded for the movie Gigantic.
Yeah, we did a concert at the Polish National Home in Brooklyn, which is, really it's an Elks or Moose Lodge kind of building, and we stuffed some fans in there and set up cameras and made a little concert film portion of the movie.
So you have to go to the movie to see this particular performance.
Yeah, exactly. And they're good.
Yeah, it was fun.
They rose to the occasion, I will say.
Before we leave, because we're just about out of time, John Flansburgh, I have to ask you and John Linnell, you guys are like the NPR darlings. I hear you on All Things Considered. I don't know if Robert Siegel personally loves you guys or the producers do.
Well, we know we've worked with Art Silverman on a couple things specifically for All Things Considered. We've actually recorded songs at their request, on subjects that they've requested. So, that was kind of the thing that got us in the door. And, they've been very supportive. Everybody, all the people at, This American Life have been super nice to us. And Sarah Vowell is actually, writing some liner notes for this anthology record that's coming out in the fall. So
Sarah Vowell, who's maybe on film in this documentary more than you guys, or almost.
Well, she's extremely, she's a quote generating machine. Yeah, she's amazingly colorful.
She left the interview. My producer Shirley and my DP all looked at each other and we said, no, the documentary should be about Sarah.
Well, that'll be your next one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to wait for this one. This one doesn't have a distributor yet, so right now your only chance to see it in Seattle is tonight at 9:30 at the Broadway Performance Hall, and it's part of the Seattle International Film Festival. John Flansburgh is one of two Johns who founded They Might Be Giants. The other is John Linnell. And your newest album that's not a children's album is Mink Car, right?
Our new album Mink Car is still available in stores, and our children's album No will be out on June 11th, which is next Tuesday, and you can get it from all those Amazon. And I also want to tell people that we're going to be performing in Seattle about a month from now. So if people want to see a bunch of octogenarians kicking out the jams.
And here's their website, www.tmbg.com.
Yep.
It has a schedule on there. A.J. Schnack is the man who made the feature-length documentary about the band. It's called Gigantic, A Tale of Two Johns. And if you want information about tickets for that, go to Seattle International Film Festival's website, seattlefilm.com. Thanks, both of you, for being here.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
This is The Beat on KUOW.